now I present to you the top 5 villains in One Piece. Number 5. Arlong. An oldie but a goodie, Arlong is a ruthless fishman who the Straw Hats encountered in East Blue before entering the Grand Line. His story is directly tied to Nami, and he serves as the ultimate antagonist of the East Blue saga. Arlong stepped into the role of villain like no other One Piece antagonist before him. He was powerful, intimidating, and painstakingly cruel. Despite that, he had depth to him, particularly in the way that he genuinely cared for his own crew members, as well as his pride in the Fishman race. Furthermore, when we eventually learn his backstory some 500 plus chapters later, it's not hard to see why he harbors nothing but pure hatred for the human race. This was a guy you wanted to punch from the second you met him, and the satisfaction of his eventual defeat is a climax point of One Piece. Then later on in the series, he becomes somewhat identifiable and a more tragic figure. But most importantly, he is a villain who has had a lasting impact on the series. Looking back on him now, even though he is quite physically weak in the grand scheme of things, he is a no less terrifying villain. His presence in the series marks the moment where One Piece is elevated from an average series to an amazing series. And that is why Arlong absolutely deserves his spot at number 5. Number 4. Sir Crocodile. As a warlord of the sea, Crocodile was the first world-renowned enemy the Straw Hats faced and demanded absolutely all of their might to overcome. I would actually argue that Crocodile is the first villain in the series who posed a proper threat to the Straw Hats. I mean, Arlong gave Luffy a tough fight for sure, but whether or not Luffy could actually beat him was never really in question. With Crocodile, Luffy lost twice before finally beating him on their third bout. And not only did Luffy just lose those first 2 times, he was absolutely decimated. Of course, Crocodile was also the first Logia user introduced in the series. His ability seemed impossible to overcome at the time, which made it all the more satisfying when it eventually was. His design is menacingly awesome, with that slicked backed hair, scar across his face, the absurdly large golden hook, and of course, the trademark cigar. During a time where most One Piece enemies had a more or less goofy and left field design, Crocodile stood out and made you take him seriously. Like Arlong, Crocodile also served as the final villain for not only an arc, but an entire saga. From the moment the Straw Hats entered the Grand Line, Crocodile was built up as a villain through the story of Princess Vivi, told over a massive 5 arcs. Even after his defeat, Crocodile remained a strong fan favorite through the eras of Enel, Rob Lucci, Gecko Moria, and, let's face it, just about every other villain that's been introduced since. With that said, there are at least 3 villains who I think have managed to surpass him. Number 3. Kaido. So this is a pretty big leap, jumping from Warlord of the Sea straight to one of the 4 emperors and the strongest creature in the world. Now Kaido is quite a unique addition to this list because unlike every other villain, he hasn't really done anything yet. We've only seen him a handful of times, but the impact his presence has had on the story in those few short panels is absolutely undeniable. His name was planted into the series after the Enies Lobby arc and would come up briefly from time to time, looming in the background, until his official introduction hundreds of chapters later. And honestly, Kaido has had the best introduction of any character in the entirety of One Piece. That panel with him all of a sudden face to face with Kid, Hawkins, and Apu alone is enough to make this list. Having him juxtaposed with 3 pirates, each of which are supposedly Luffy's equals, instantly makes us understand just how absurdly powerful and terrifying Kaido is. And to top it all off, for all intents and purposes, Kaido is immortal. His hobby is trying to find a way to kill himself. He even jumped off a sky island, which is probably the most badass thing anybody has ever done in the series. Honestly, the only reason why Kaido isn't number 1 in my eyes is because we haven't seen much else from him yet. During and after the Wano arc, he could easily take the number 1 spot. But as of right now, he'll just have to settle for number 3. Number 2. Blackbeard. Sitting in the number 2 spot, we have a villain who is practically the antithesis of Luffy. Blackbeard is what happens when you take Luffy's unbelievable luck and give it to someone with purely sinister motives. As a villain, Blackbeard has achieved an incredible amount, including defeating and capturing Luffy's brother Ace, becoming a warlord of the sea, betraying the world government by breaking into Impel Down, and delivering the final blow to kill Whitebeard, the strongest man in the world, and then eventually becoming one of the 4 emperors. In terms of goals, Blackbeard really only has one left, and that is to become Pirate King, which sets him up to be potentially the final villain of all of One Piece. Blackbeard is also quite unique in that he is the only known character in the history of this world to have consumed 2 devil fruits and lived. Not only that, they just so happen to be 2 of the most dangerous devil fruits in existence. Exactly how he did this is a mystery. A lot about Blackbeard is a mystery, but there's no denying that sense of pure dread that overcomes me whenever he or any of his crew makes an appearance in the story. Just like Kaido, Blackbeard could very well end up taking the #1 spot by the time his character is fully explored. But for now, there is indeed one character who still surpasses him. Number 1. Sakazuki. There's probably no surprise here, as this admiral turned fleet admiral is probably the most successful villain in the series to date. He is cold, calculating, and represents the terrifying idea of absolute justice. He is the epitome of what happens when good goes too far. The villain with a black and white perspective on life, and will absolutely not hesitate to carry out whatever he believes to be in the best interest of justice. Sakazuki rose to notoriety for executing Luffy's brother Ace during the Paramount War. In addition to that, he also faced the strongest man in the world, Whitebeard, in one-on-one combat, managing to blow off half of Whitebeard's face in the process. Sakazuki did lose that engagement, however he returned shortly after with a vengeance and went full Terminator on everyone present at Marineford. It took Shanks and the entirety of the red-haired pirates arriving just to stop Sakazuki. He is an absolute beast and another huge contender to be the final villain of One Piece. However, on paper, Blackbeard still seems like the more top villain. So why is Sakazuki #1 on this list? It's because of a simple event that occurred after Marineford. Blackbeard had captured Jewelry Bonnie, and Sakazuki was sent personally to retrieve her. When Blackbeard heard that Sakazuki was approaching, he ordered his entire crew to flee rather than face him. So if you thought that Blackbeard was a top villain, well, this is the guy that Blackbeard is afraid of. And that is why Sakazuki beats out Blackbeard.